You're listening to the Be Better Off Show by Kelly+Partners.
Well, good morning and welcome to the Be Better Off Show for 2021. Fantastic to have our first guest and first edition for this year. Now, on the Be Better Off Show, what's it all about? It's about helping people be healthier, wealthier, and wiser, running their businesses in a way that works with their whole life. And I couldn't be more excited to have our guest today, Tim Foote, who is one of Australia's leading real estate agents, working in one of Australia's toughest real estate markets. Apart from that, he's a qualified architect and a great guy. Good morning, Tim.
Top of the morning, Brett. Great to be a part of the show.
Really nice to have you. Now, we always like to start at the beginning because the beginning is a good place to start. Tell us about your story. Where did you grow up? What was your training? And how did you get into real estate?
Yeah, great question. So I grew up on the North Shore, was educated on the North Shore, went to Sydney Uni, did 2 architecture degrees, and then worked for Lend-Lease in their sort of property development stream. I got a sort of undergraduate position and then a graduate position there. And then from that, I was there for 5 years and loved working in that organisation, and then went back and did some extra study. And out of that, I was looking to do some property development, and I went to a mate of mine who'd started the Belle Property group. This was back in 2000, and I said, this is what I'm thinking of doing. And he said, you should consider real estate. It's a great way to learn the market, what people want, etc. And I've got to say that kind of hit me from left field because I'd never considered that, and I was still studying. At the end of those studies, which is about 6 months down the track, it sort of made strange logic, and I went back to him and said, is there a role? And he said there was. So I got into real estate.
So it's a great story. And in dealing with Tim, people will find that background in real estate and development means he's certainly more thoughtful than the average agent, really understands, the actual product he's selling. But in terms of the business of real estate, Tim, for young guys, like often, like you, I guess you look at real estate, the agency line of business and think it's one thing, like so many roles. They look like one thing on the outside, but on the inside, there's something quite different. When you sort of went in there your first 6 months and you're trying to build up in the agency space, what were the biggest differences between your sort of previous perception and the reality on the job?
Look, I think the biggest in your face about real estate, particularly when you're starting from ground zero, is developing the hunter instinct. In what we do is you need to be continually on the front foot looking for business, because our transaction cycle is short. If you do it well, it's 4 weeks, and so you've got to then find the next mandate, and so that creates this ability, this strength in if you put it in the broader context, in business development, and that was the biggest challenge. I didn't come from a sales background at all. My education wasn't in that. My family background wasn't in that, and so to be confronted with being on the front foot, making calls, reaching out, getting rejected daily, that was a big challenge.
What is it that you think helped you sort of move forward? So you're now in real estate. You're trying to work out that, if you don't do something, nothing happens.
Yeah, well said.
And I make that comment because I feel like in many roles in businesses, it's someone else doing the doing that makes something happen, or it may well be the brand that's been doing it for 100 years that did something at some point that makes something happen. But Belle Property, when you joined, was a newer group looking to establish itself in the upper end of the market. How confronting was that?
Oh, mate, it was hugely confronting. To be transparent, I came on as an employee. The original structure of Belle was a corporate structure, and they had been wanting to open an office in Mossman. They had a guy lined up. That guy didn't work out, and so I got thrust into not just real estate, but to being responsible for a startup and a business with next to zero experience. And to be frank, in the first 12 months, I resigned 3 times. I was like, you know what? I just can't do this. It's too hard. And my boss at the time, to his credit, be like, mate, have a couple of days off, catch your breath. When you get back, let's talk about it. And he he was sort of the strength when I didn't have the strength, and got me through those times. And then when you look back, you sort of smile and laugh, because if I'd given up then, it would have been a disaster to have missed out on the opportunities that have come forward from getting through those times.
So you're married to Beck, 3 kids?
4 kids.
4 kids. Were you married at that point when you started?
I was dating Beck. We weren't married at that stage.
So I always ask this because, private businesses are so affected by this, the state and the psychology and the time of life of the owners. So you're dating, you're trying to start a startup, you haven't started a family, you're trying to change careers, you're with a new startup brand. I'd love you to share, the role of, and I'm not sure I like the word, but, a mentor, but really I've come to believe that leadership is just so critical. You mentioned there, and I think it's a real nugget of, there was a senior guy and he gave you the support, the shove along you needed when it was really hard. Tell us about your relationship with that sort of leader and the difference that sort of made.
Oh, looking back on it, there's no doubt that having some professional mentorship in terms of, organizational structure, as well as some personal people that I could turn to, that's what got me through those times. Without those, I wouldn't have got through. And I think, the dynamic was the guy who was my boss was a mate. I'd been to school with him since I was 10 years old, and he was a thoroughbred entrepreneur and still to this day one of the best salespeople I've ever met. And his ability, one, from an emotional point of view, just to stand by me when I was weak, and secondly, from a skill development point of view, to be able to impart his skills. He sort of had a core of about 5 or 6 guys, happened to be guys that he kind of would lead and train. He had a training plan of kind of how you go from zero to hero as a real estate agent, and that stuff was priceless. I'd certainly say, looking at our business now, we've got a strong mentoring program. We kind of we call it an academy within our business, which is really the future of our business. And I just think it is so critical, in those early days, to get underneath the right leader as opposed to chase the biggest dollar or whatever else your aspirations would be early in your career.
Yeah, very, very interesting. So the business now, over that 20-year journey, share with us how you sort of went from the corporate employee model, bought into the business, grew the business, grew another office, sold another office. How do you think about that journey, and what has that journey been?
Oh, look, the journey's been brilliant. It hasn't been without its downs and its ups and its challenges and its successes. But it all of those things, when you look back on them, the challenges are most probably more rewarding than the successes, because you learn the most. I think, looking at the numbers or at the journey in 2006, I sort of looked at the business and I thought, okay, we've got some momentum. From a corporate point of view, I felt like the business's focus was elsewhere other than agency. The leader of the business has gone on to be an incredibly successful developer, and that's where his real passion was. And so I approached them and said, look, would you consider selling the business to me in terms of, the particular office in Mossman that I set up? And we were able to negotiate a deal. And that was the first foray in seeing the opportunity as an owner. When I started, my aspirations coming out of architecture was really to be, the CEO of a big company. I hadn't thought about being an entrepreneur or starting stuff. But then, and I wasn't sort of looking at that when I did this. It was more of I see an opportunity and I think I can step into that. And I did that. And then that did really well. Then the GFC hit. Belle Corporate got bought out by the current owner, who is a real estate, genius. And in the GFC, he kind of tapped me on the shoulder and said, look, I think you should look at buying this adjacent business. And it was 3 times the size of us. It was a little bit like David swallowing Goliath. But I stepped into that, and that then, really put us on the map. We went from being a small operation into a large operation in the terms of our marketplace.
And then, again, you've got, owner of Belle Headco. When he comes to you, and I think, there's a great book that charts the journeys of 32 billionaires, and it talks about major capital accumulation events. So behind any wealth build, there's certain times where people have opportunities and they do things that make a material difference to their situation. And it sounds like GFC, buying a business 3 times your size, again, you had the benefit of a senior person that had sort of walked the path, and you're able to walk with them. That's just a major change in the business. How did you build a relationship, obviously, you trusted, your mentor / advisor, owner. What was the sort of, at that point, you're married and whatnot, how did you get your head around that? Because most people that we work with, when the opportunity comes, I've got a terrific mentor, and he says, Brett, when the window opens and the house is on fire, make sure you jump out. Because a lot of people think about it, hesitate, doubt themselves. How do you manage your state and build your confidence to do those things?
Look, I suppose I had confidence in Peter's advice. When we first started, I was turning over about sort of $2.5 million in income in the business. And he said to me, he goes, you should be a $10 million business. And I was like, I couldn't comprehend that thought. We were doing pretty well at $2.5 million. And so then when he kind of opened that idea, I started to chew on it. And then you start to go, okay, you start to think about how you could do that. And then you start to see how you can do it, and you start to walk that out. So to me, it wasn't, I suppose, how do you build the confidence on it? I suppose I get an idea, and then I start to chew on it. And so you start to think it through. So the acquisition of this competitor, I looked at the numbers, and there's a couple of things. One, I looked at them from a structural point of view, and you could see that they had good people, but they were being poorly run. So that immediately said there was an opportunity there. And then I looked at the numbers, and the numbers suggested that, again, if you acquired it at the right price, then you could really grow an opportunity there. So I suppose it was a combination of working through an idea in my mind. It's a little bit like, a cow chews its food. You just ruminate on something, and as you ruminate, you start to get more confidence in it because you start to see how you can do it, and then you step into it. And then when we stepped into it, it had its challenges, but not to be surprised by those challenges, but we got through those, and step at a time, you step into the opportunity.
So you've then got yourself a business that you're trying to grow into, I guess, in your mind and work through. In integrating a much larger acquisition, and I'm actually doing a presentation tomorrow. I've been asked to, on a Saturday at lunchtime, talk to a group of people about growing your business more swiftly through acquisition. But when you make a larger acquisition, can you share with us, the critical things that you saw? You're bringing a lot of new people into the business that got their own habits, their own way of looking at the world, their own systems, their own culture, if you can call it that often. How did you make that work, sort of get your arms around that and bring people together?
Yeah, good question. In that situation, you're buying, the asset you're buying in real estate is the recurring income, which comes out of property management, and then the sales team are generally a bonus. Looking at it, to be frank, the sales team didn't really fit our culture, and we didn't keep a whole lot of the salespeople. What it did do was it gave us increased recurring revenue, which then gave us a solid platform, which then allowed us to put on a sales manager, which then allowed us to recruit more agents that fitted into our culture. So it was sort of understanding what are the, what's the meat that you're going to keep, and what are the bones that you're happy to let go.
When you think about culture, how would you have compared the two cultures?
Look, I think that the culture, our culture's changed over time. So looking back at what this was now 2008, 2009, right in the GFC. And, I would describe our culture as team focused, as very much wanting to be the best that you can be, and make the most of the opportunity. I think the culture that was in that business was a little bit prickly in terms of that team wasn't an important part of how they roll. The people involved in that weren't necessarily team players. And so and likewise, you had a mixture of people who were high performers but not team oriented, and then average performers who didn't have that, I'm going to do everything I can to realize my full potential. They were more in cruise mode. So those people just fundamentally didn't fit in our business. They knew that, we knew that, and so they didn't last. the beauty of the property management business is that it's recurring income, and if you service those clients, they stay with you, and so that allows you to have a greater base and a greater presence in the market.
So in our business, I've just said that we want people for others that do what they say and act as part of a team. We try to, I meet a lot of people, they talk about culture, and I try to say to people, like, define those things down. I really hear there that, a team-based culture. I've written down personal development, people that are committed to growing themselves personally and in their career, and that will really make the most, of opportunities. I always consider maximizers as opposed to what's the least I can do to get by. Have you defined up those ideas to help you sort of train through, recruit, and I guess more amplify these ideas through the place? Are the guys from front desk to back desk, do you think today they're more aware of these ideas?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you'd be aware, so in our business, the kind of the flywheel moments in our business, I suppose, was starting up, was the GFC, and then COVID last year. I brought in a business partner, a guy called Stefan Bertram, and right in the middle of COVID, like May 2020, and the headline of our thinking was chaos is the opportunity. And so we stepped into him becoming part of the business. That's done incredible things for us. And one of the things that he is hugely strong on, and he's become the managing partner in our business, and which has freed up my time to sell more and to also do some other opportunities. And he's got a very clear culture that he's got a number of points, which are, the first one is accountability is our backbone, and so living where everybody's accountable. The second one is that everybody has a coach, so that we are all wanting to develop to be the best that we can be. Another one is none of us get offended by feedback. That feedback is given in the context of love and development. And so these things, he repeats over and over again, and they become, really clear, crystallized, and they're not kind of the typical, corporate manager. We've got to have a corporate statement. These are the things that we live and breathe, and that you keep people accountable to. You actually, when you're giving feedback, you remind people, none of us are offended by feedback. We're giving this feedback to help you develop, and because we care for you and want the best for you and the best for the business.
It's really interesting. I think it's a defining thing of high-performing businesses that they're clear on their core ideas, and it's really, I've got this phrase, Tim, called management by repeating yourself.
100%.
And then hopefully, you're making progress when you overhear your team repeating the core good ideas that, I don't claim as mine. I just claim as essentially universal principles, which is very cool. Now, tell us about the market. I know our listeners will be, our clients, they love real estate. They've heavily invested. What are you seeing in the Mossman market as a sort of a microcosm of the broader world we're living in?
Look, I think the things that have been well commentated upon is that the magnificent rebound of real estate through COVID. We really saw from July 2020 where the market started to emerge and grow, and it was interesting. In the second half of last calendar year, there was definitely a sense that freestanding houses across the board, and it really sort of stemmed from the lower end and moved up. It's interesting how different cycles have sort of rolled out. So the house market has been strong for 6 months now. The apartment market was actually pretty weak, and I think there's some buying opportunity there. We saw that opportunity and have purchased a couple of apartments because we thought that was fundamentally weaker than it should be. And so coming into 21, I think that we will continue to see the house market grow, and I think that there could well be a 5 to 10% growth in this calendar year. And I also, if we compare that in that apartment space at let's say September last year, for a 2-bedroom apartment, we were getting, say, 10 people through and open for inspection on a Saturday. We intentionally came back early in January because we felt people were here and therefore, let's be in the marketplace while people are around. And we were seeing, 30 groups through the same apartment or the same type of apartment. And so I kind of think we're at the beginning of that apartment market recovery, which I think we'll see more of. So I kind of see that house and apartment market both moving strongly this year, whereas last year it was mainly that house market.
Very interesting. So in the paper today, so it's the 5th of February 2021 today, the Bank of England is working with the UK banks to prepare them for administering negative interest rates for the first time in history, on the basis that if the rollout of the vaccine in the UK doesn't grab and really make an impact over the next 6 months, they may want to use negative interest rates. And for our listeners on a macro basis, my view is that interest rates are low, staying low, and or going lower. The effect of the Chinese economy is to export massive deflation. And remember, communists, if there's one thing they hate money lenders. And so it is their agenda to reduce the profitability of money lenders generally. So seize the means of production, point one. Number two, kill off the money lenders, this time figuratively rather than literally. So interest rates through massive export of deflation are going to stay low. And then when you think in Australia, the psychology of people, most people are heavily invested in their family home. They have superannuation because the government makes them. They may have a holiday house, but if they're investing, they typically invest in property. And so in that context, it's hard to see property doing anything but go forward because essentially people have a personal guarantee on property. So I'm always bullish on what comes next. I think you've seen over 20 years that it's hard to see the market go backwards. Over a cycle of a decade, it typically almost doubles if it doesn't double. But it's quite interesting, your commentary. I think the lifestyle considerations, Tim, around how close you're living to people, how healthy an environment is to live in, has affected the unit market, in that people have said, well, hang on, if there's a virus around, I want some space between me and the next person. That was my view as to why lifestyle properties really took off. But now, to your point, it does look like units are not overpriced and yields might be on the way back on that basis.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Yeah, it's interesting. So when you now, I have young people come to me consistently saying, oh, look, I wanted to get some work experience. And I'm like, okay, good. I'm sure you have the same. And one of the things that always occurs to me, I've got a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old, and I know you've got young kids now or growing kids. I ask everyone on the show, and I make a habit of asking people that have learned how to achieve their goals, is the way I like to describe them, because I don't like to describe people as successful. I like to say to people, hey, this person knows how to achieve their goals, which because I don't really subscribe to defining success for other people. But you've managed with Beck and the family to achieve so many of your goals. What are the lessons that you would put to somebody, a young person, a 16-year-old Tim Foote, saying, righto, I want to come in and do year 10 work experience for a week. If they walk out after a week, what are the lessons you want them to walk out with?
Yeah, good question. I think that the things that I think they can learn from us would be, one, the lesson of what does a good team culture look like and feel like. And that can be valued for them as to then understand the organisation that they want to be a part of when they sort of get into their career, or, the organisation that they want to lead if they want to, establish their own. So that would be the first thing, I think, giving people a sense of that. I think the second thing, in real estate, it's funny, if you look about where real estate agents are held in the social ladder, it's reasonably low.
Right up there with accountants.
Indeed, but some of the things we do, some of the skills that we develop are world class. Like our ability to hunt, which is the fundamental of any business, that you need to find business. The things that we do and the attitude that we have and the strength of our muscle in that hunting and growth space is world class. And so to learn that business generally comes from those who go out and seek it and find it. And understanding just how to do that, because it's not rocket science, but it does require a whole lot of effort and skill to do that successfully. So that'd be the second thing. And then I suppose the third thing is just giving them a bit of an appetite into the property space and giving them a feel for, what does the property industry look like and feel like, because it's, it is one of the backbones of the Australian economy, of any economy, and just getting to see the joy of that space.
It's really great. But tell us, Tim, the most valuable property you've sold?
60 million.
Yeah. So for our listeners, if you get an opportunity to find somebody who knows how to complete a $60 million transaction in their market, and so that's really at the top of the pops in terms of what can happen in the role that Tim's playing in that industry, and then ask them. I think, I want to explore this hunting piece. It's unfashionable to ask for business. I think it's certainly not taught at school. You did a Bachelor of Architecture and then a Master's, yeah?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah, so I did a Bachelor of Business, as a CA, a FP, a Master's in Tax. So, we've both got heavy formal qualifications, and in every formal educational, in inverted commas, environment that I've ever been in, they never taught two things. One, how to work well with people, speaking to the team culture, how to really lead people, work with people to ensure that the cumulative impact of multiple people was more than any individual could achieve. And they certainly never taught how to hunt and find business and make things happen. I consider that just a massive tragedy for young people entering, the world generally. Run us through, I'm sitting down at a desk. I was very lucky to do a couple of years training with Dr. Fred Gross very early. I lost a job. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I read a great book that said meet people who've been successful. I wrote to them. I found them. I read 2,000 books. But one of the things I stumbled upon by interviewing Simon Reynolds in the ad industry at that point was he said, Brett, you have to have a coach. And he recommended Dr. Fred. And I did 2 years with Dr. Fred with some radically amazing people from real estate, insurance, and other random industries like advertising. But to a person, they knew how to make business happen. So to me, in our industry, that's just been unusual and very helpful. You've got a young guy comes in. I've got one here today. He's just finished school. What are you going to show them? How are they going to make
hunting piece? So look, to tell a little bit of backstory and then I'll answer that. The backstory is when I got into real estate, as I say, I had no background in sales whatsoever. And I was embarrassed to say I was a salesperson. If I was at the pub, chatting to someone, people would say, what are you? I say, I studied architecture. And then after about 6 months, I realized that anybody doing anything in life is selling. Whether you're the CEO of a company, whether you're a preacher in a pulpit, whether you're a real estate agent, whether you're an accountant, whatever, everybody needs new clients. Everybody needs to win business. So I kind of, the penny dropped in my head that selling is actually an incredibly valuable skill rather than something to be ashamed of. So the mindset shift was the first thing for me. And then to your point, what would I teach a 15-year-old coming into our office around hunting? The first thing is that mindset that this is a good thing. If you've got a service or a product that you truly believe will help people, then you're doing the right thing by letting people know about it. The second thing is then understanding that I think the essence of good selling is where you're trying to help someone. So rather than where a lot of people would do it in our industry, people would pick up the phone and call a random person and say, do you want to sell your property? To me, that's annoying. But if you've got an attitude of you've got a product that you believe in or a service that you believe in and you want to help the people who need that service, then suddenly your profession becomes noble rather than annoying. So the mindset's the first thing. In terms of a practical perspective, when I first got into real estate, my boss said to me, you got to find 1,000 people that you want to talk to and they want to talk to you. And then you got to talk to them once a quarter and you need to keep them up to date with what's happening in the marketplace. And so we did that. And in our marketplace, I found a niche that I thought wasn't being well serviced, which was sort of luxury apartments on the lower North Shore. And so I then proactively found 1,000 people with properties like that and serviced them. And then it got to the point where a lot of them weren't thinking of selling in the short term, but the law of numbers tells you that out of 1,000 people, there's going to be 50 to 100 that are. And so suddenly you build relationship. Those people then start to open up, and then you started to get into doors. To the point, great story. When I started that, literally 10 years later, because my marketplace had expanded, so I wasn't focusing on that anymore. This little old lady called me up and said, "You used to call me every few months and tell me what's happening in the market, and now it's time to sell and I want to talk to you." And I hadn't spoken to her because my market shifted. I hadn't spoken to her for 8 years.
It's a great story, Tim. So, I'm going to take that and share that because, I'm constantly saying you plant a seed and you don't know the day that person calls you. I've had people call me 8 or 9 years later and say, "Hey, you presented here and I didn't have that problem then, but I do now. Can you help?" The idea that, this shift of mindset, that if you've got something that is designed to really make a positive difference to other people, to go to the market wanting to help people, and shifting that from noble, from annoying to noble, I think is a really great insight, and that long-term mindset. So you got your 1,000 people, you're giving them a quarterly update, you're staying in touch. How do you manage, I just think emotional states are important. How do you, I see today that if there's one thing that hurts people in their desire to get better results, it's their short-term mindset around, I called that person yesterday and they didn't buy from me today. I call it having an investor's mentality, knowing that there's a cumulative return for long-term effort and it builds over time. But, how did you manage that?
Look, from a practical point of view, when we started, we used to say, okay, you got to talk to 20 people a day. We've lifted the bar. We now say to our associates, you need to talk to 50 people a day. But just knowing that success was actually being able to tick that box. I did what I set out to do today, which was to make a number of contacts, because that's completely within your control. I can't control if I find a seller. I can't control whether they choose me, but I can control how many people I talk to. Yeah. So when you can shift the dial to be success is then within your control as opposed to outside of it, that can build confidence, because once success breeds success. Once you achieve a goal, it then encourages you to increase that goal and then get bigger and bigger and better and better. So I think what you measure is a critical part of that. And then secondly, again, the psychology of it is realizing that, the hardest thing is the rejections, is people, not wanting to talk to you or whatever. And then realizing that actually I've got a great product. They're not interested. That's their problem, not mine. And so, obviously you've got to fine tune that. Am I presenting it well, to understand you're controlling the part that you can control, but the parts you can't control, you got to let go of.
Yeah, it's very, very cool. Now, you mentioned before, I heard of a term, Flywheel. Since we started our business in 2006, every person that's joined Kelly+Partners has been given 2 books. One's called Good to Great by Jim Collins. The other one's called Raving Fans. And in Good to Great, that term of the flywheel is well explained. This idea that consistent effort over time builds momentum. I'm a huge believer in momentum. But your insight there for our listeners, control what you can control, measure what you can control, manage your state. If you're talking to 20 people, talk to 50. If you're not getting the results that you want, think about how you're presenting it, refine. How do you work with a coach in this context? When you're at the top of your game, a lot of people aren't that interested in feedback, to your earlier comment. They tend to think that the only people that can give them feedback are people above them in their mind. Whereas I have found that the best feedback I can get I have a Beck as well, Tim, and she's excellent at feedback. And I say that facetiously, but genuinely, your partner, your kids, the person at the coffee shop, the person at the dry cleaner, that openness to feedback I found really helpful. How do you work with your coach, and how do you seek, when you're performing well is when I think you need feedback the most, but how do you seek it and keep that open mind?
Yeah, look, that is a brilliant question to dig into. You know, my Beck, like your Beck, you know, I really see her as my most trusted advisor. She has a business background. She's got a business degree, but she's been raising our 4 kids for the last 16 years. So she's not in the business, but her insight into our business and into me as a business person is exceptional. And the dynamic between us, I'm the entrepreneur who sees the opportunity. She's the executor who nuts through the problem. So she's, you know, when we first got married, it was kind of like I felt like I was the yes and she was the no. And then I realized that no, we were actually incredible complements, because if I pursued all the things that I thought that I felt yes to, I would go bust or fall in a hole. And she's not a no. She's actually just, let's work it through so we then know which opportunity to step into. So, you know, and I think, you know, all our partners are probably our most valuable asset. I think I see a lot of guys in particular who don't appreciate how valuable their wife's wisdom is, because they don't see them in the workforce. But for those, you know, those partners who don't work, but I think there's huge value to bring to the table in terms of opposites attracting and complementing one another. And then the second thing would be around getting feedback. I mentioned Stefan coming into our business. You know, he's 20 years my junior. I could quite easily stand on my pedestal and go, you know, I've been awarded the best agent in the country. I've been the number 1 agent in our network 12 out of the last 16 years, and go, you know, I'm happy with my performance. But his nature is to keep people account and to coach. And so he started pushing my buttons into areas where I was doing good, and kind of opened up the door to what great could look like in that space. And so, you know, in this 8 months that he's been in business, my personal generation has more than doubled. And that has a big part of that is being prepared to go, okay, this 49-year-old bloke is going to be prepared to listen to this 31-year-old bloke. And rather than say, I know better, to actually go, okay, no, let's have a listen to this. This is painful. I don't want to listen to this. But if I do, good things may come out of it. And guess what? They have.
Yeah, it's really great. We were so lucky, Beck and I. We attended a function of 40 people with Roger Federer. And, you know, Warren Buffett's a great hero of mine. And he says, you know, tell me who your heroes are and I'll tell you who you'll end up. And he's got this great saying that he says, you know, hang around people better than you. So I'm listening to Federer. First thing, you know, that really struck me is he said, you know, when I became number 1 player in the world, which had been my goal since I was 10, I went looking for the coach that could keep me number 1 in the world for the next 5 years and hired Tony Roach. And then he went through how, with Tony Roach, he unpacked everything he did and said, right, how do I make it more consistent, make it more bulletproof, and move to another level? And so it always struck me that really high performers, they get around people that are even better than they are. But obviously Tony Roach in his 70s at that point was unable to beat Roger in a game of tennis. He saw him as somebody who could take him to another level. It was incredible. The openness of a guy who by any measure, you know, could sit back and say, look, I'm one of the best ever, and that'll do me, thanks. And he compared himself to Kyrgios, the Australian, and he said to, you know, there were some quite negative questions from the group about Kyrgios, and he said, look, you know, you need to understand it depends what your goals are. You know, Nick has done probably better than he ever thought he would, and that might be okay for him. But for me, I just had different goals. So really, really interesting. Mate, I want to just close with I think the part that you've mentioned a couple of times, and I think that, you know, if there's anything in my view that stops people sort of living the life they want and certainly achieving their goals, it's their fear of rejection. In real estate, you know, you are out there, you are face-to-face, hand-to-hand, and quite often people will make a choice that can easily be framed as rejection. I touched on it there where you said, you know, if you're trying to help people and, you know, they don't choose you to help them at this time, then you've got to find a way to move forward. Can you share with our listeners, you know, specifically, how do you deal with that rejection? Because you know it hurts when you're in the game. It doesn't hurt if you just opt out, but how do you manage it?
Look, I think there's a few parts to it. One is that first piece of the way you go into it. And so having the attitude of, I can control what I can control. If they choose me or they don't, don't want to be a part of what we're doing, that's their issue, not mine. So having that mindset of doing, controlling what you control and letting go of what you can't. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is, if you've got an abundance mentality, and it's that they're easy words to say, but if you really sort of ruminate on that and realize that there's massive opportunity out there, it's about just increasing the number of opportunities that you get exposed to. So, for example, if you're targeting one client and you miss that client, then you're toast. And that will destroy you. But if you've got 10 clients that you're aiming at and you miss one, then it's kind of like, that's all right, I'll just focus on the other 9. So having an abundance mentality that not everything depends on this, that you've got to get exposed to more opportunities. And then the third thing, I suppose, when one really does hurt, it is, I suppose, the ability to go back to what really counts in life, and when you're starting out, each of those mandates in what we do, that is the difference between succeeding and not succeeding. There's no second place in real estate, but appreciating that life is bigger than business, and getting your self-worth and self-confidence from other places than your business performance, even though, your financial world obviously underpins everything that you do.
Yeah, very, very good. So for our listeners, I hope that's been helpful today. I wanted to get Tim to come and, share his story, which I think is genuinely inspiring, and the lessons that he's learned. I think it's easy to look at a profession from the outside and not really understand it, but I think so many of the different professions we're engaged in can teach all of us things that are just particularly helpful. So Tim, thank you so much for today. I'd love to have you on again, maybe with you and Stefan. I'd love to explore with both of you this idea of, how do you get, because I see it so commonly, how do you get, high-performing people to work effectively in a partnership, particularly when they're not the same age? It's just something that's occurred to me. I wanted to say it here and remind myself, because succession in business is probably the greatest issue facing private business owners across Australia. And so often a 49-year-old just can't work with a 31-year-old. And so I'd love to get you guys back and explore that, because I think, I've watched what you guys have done in the market. I think it's tremendous. So, mate, as I love to say to all of our guests, have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having us, Brett.
Thanks for listening to the Be Better Off Show. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate and review on Apple Podcasts.